They say grief hits like a wave, but mine didn't crash. It seeped in slow and quiet like water slipping under a locked door. My father was dead. And for the first time in my life, I realized how invisible I had become, even to the man who taught me how to calculate risk like prayer. I'm Evelyn Whitmore, daughter of Harold Whitmore, real estate magnate, old money monarch of the East Coast, a man whose signature built skylines. My mother, Eleanor, was elegance dipped in cold steel, and Nicholas, my older brother, my father's pride, the crowned heir of Whitmore. Holdings was everything. I was not charming, reckless, magnetic. I was the one who knew how to fix the books when Nicholas overdrew the investment fund. The one who read real estate agreements for fun at 14. The one who sat silently at gala dinners, never asked to speak, only expected to show up in black and smile politely. I was trained to be a ghost with manners. Growing up in the Whitmore mansion meant learning how to exist without disturbing the air. The house had 22 rooms, and yet I always ended up alone in the library, curled up under a blanket with highlighters and legal pads annotating books I wasn't assigned. My mother said I was too intense. My father just grunted. Nicholas, he called me the family calculator. When I turned 16, I received a pen engraved with EW. Nicholas got a vintage Rolex, my mother said. The pen is mightier, but no one ever asked me to sign anything. I remember one Christmas when I was 21, Nicholas was home from business school in Paris. I'd just completed a dual degree architecture and finance with honors. At dinner, my father raised a glass and said, "To Nicholas, our future." I looked down at my plate and whispered to myself, "What am I, then, our ghost?" When my father collapsed in his study, he was alone. The staff said it was sudden aneurysm. He'd left his journal open on the desk and a glass of scotch half finished beside him. My mother didn't cry. Nicholas smashed the scotch against the fireplace. I sat on the rug and stared at the last thing he ever touched, an old blueprint of our estate. He always treated the house like a monument. Now it felt like a tomb. The funeral was lavish, of course, a sea of black silk and false sympathy. Politicians, CEOs, society's elite, they all came to mourn a man they never really knew. My mother gave a speech. Nicholas wept at the podium. No one asked if I wanted to speak, but it wasn't the funeral that broke me. It was the will. It was read 3 weeks later. Private setting, downtown law firm. Everything was mahogany and marble, like grief had to be expensive to be valid. Nicholas strolled in, late sunglasses, perched, like grief didn't apply to him. My mother wore white, not cream, white power move. I sat at the end of the long table next to a cold window. My fingers numb, my breath controlled. 2 attorneys entered with a single envelope and a flash drive. One of them said, "Your father left a video," and just like that, Harold Whitmore spoke from the grave. "To my beloved family, I leave what I hope is peace. To my wife, Eleanor. I leave the remainder of the trust managed by Whitmore Holdings. To my son, Nicholas, I leave the family estate and majority shares in Whitmore Commercial, and to my daughter, Evelyn." A pause. "Too long. I trust you will find your own way as you always have." That was it. No property, no shares, no land, no explanation. Just a line that sounded like admiration if you squinted, but I knew what it was. A dismissal. The room fell into that strange kind of silence. The one where no one wants to be the first to react. Nicholas scratched his beard and muttered something about fairness. My mother didn't even look at me, just folded her hands and said, "You're brilliant, darling. You'll be fine." I stood up and walked out. No goodbye, no rage, no tears, just a calm, deliberate exit. The kind of silence that makes people uncomfortable for years. That night, I went back to my apartment, 1 bedroom, over a bakery, smelled like cinnamon and compromise. I turned off my phone, boiled water, opened my father's old architectural sketchbook, the one I'd stolen from the estate when I was 15. Then I opened a fresh notebook, dated the first page, and wrote 2 words, "Document everything." I didn't know it yet, but in that moment the girl they left out of the will began writing her own. A week after the will reading, they threw a party, not a memorial. A celebration legacy night, they called it, gold-foiled invitations, live jazz, an open bar under chandeliers. I wasn't allowed to touch growing up. The Whitmore estate, just 7 days after burying the man who built it, was dressed like a wedding cake, thick with flowers, fat with vanity, and hollow at the center. I wasn't on the guest list, but I went anyway. I wore a black pantsuit with no jewelry, hair pulled back, no smiles. When the valet asked for my name, I gave him my father's, Evelyn Whitmore. His eyes twitched. The moment I stepped into the ballroom, the music felt too loud, like it was trying to erase something it didn't want to admit happened. Nicholas saw me first. He raised a glass from across the room, gave me a tight-lipped smirk. then turned back to his conversation with two venture capitalists who probably couldn't spell our last name without checking their phones, my mother. She was near the fireplace speaking to a man from the art museum. When her gaze met mine, there was a flicker. Was it guilt? No, just calculation. She walked over slowly like a queen stepping down from her throne. Darling, I didn't think you'd come. I wasn't invited. Don't be dramatic. You're always welcome. As a guest, I asked. As family, she corrected, smoothing invisible dust off my shoulder. But you've always been independent. That's your gift. I didn't answer. She kissed my cheek with a chill that felt contractual. I wandered through the estate like a stranger walking her own crime scene, the grand hall, the east staircase, the study, my father's study where I wasn't allowed after age 12. Nicholas now used it as a content room. I paused at the doorway, watching him live stream a speech about modernizing legacy. He called himself the next generation of Whitmore vision. My stomach turned. Near the end of the night, I overheard one of my aunts whisper, "She should be grateful. She's not burdened with all this responsibility. Grateful for being erased, for being passed over, for being forgotten in a room where every brick held my childhood." I left before dessert, walked through the garden alone, past the sundial. I helped restore when I was 16, past the fountain I used to read beside. The house glowed behind me, alive with champagne and backstabbing laughter. And I realized something bone deep. They didn't just take the inheritance, they took witness. They wanted the story told without me in it. When I got home, my apartment smelled of wet paper and cheap dish soap. There was a letter in the mailbox, a tax document, forgotten pension line from a past internship, nothing meaningful, nothing big. Still, I held it like a spark, because if this was what they thought I was worth, then they hadn't looked closely enough. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, pulled out my notebook, the one where I'd written "document everything," and I started writing. I made lists, not of revenge, not of pain, but of assets. Properties under Nicholas's name. Debts hidden in holding companies. Gaps in the estate transition. Weak points in their foundation, both structural and personal. I mapped it like a renovation. They handed me nothing, so I started auditing everything. In the weeks that followed, I became a ghost in my own family's history. I visited the county clerk's office under an old classmate's name, pulled deeds, requested tax filings, traced shell companies, cross-referenced trust modifications filed without my knowledge. What I found shocked even me. My father, despite all his public discipline, had left the legacy riddled with paper rot. Nicholas had already mortgaged part of the estate to fund a disastrous cryptocurrency venture. He'd also borrowed against the family's lakefront property in Maine and used it to invest in a luxury wellness resort that never broke ground. And worse, the mineral rights in South Carolina worth tens of millions were never fully transferred. The document required 3 signatures, only 2 were on it. The third line was marked EW Mine. I stared at it for hours, that lone space. My absence, not a mistake, a hesitation, a decision. My father had left a door open, just one, and I was ready to walk through it. Meanwhile, Nicholas flaunted his title like a name tag. He did interviews, launched a foundation, started designing a whiskey label with our family crest. Every public move he made was built on private negligence, and I stayed in the shadows. I got coffee with old professors who now ran city planning boards. I bought secondhand corporate law textbooks and read them on my lunch breaks. I downloaded real estate forecasting software and learned the language of flipping power. I wasn't mourning anymore, I was calculating. One day I saw a social media post, Nicholas and my mother on the estate balcony, glasses raised, the caption read, "Legacy secured." I closed the app, opened a spreadsheet, and smiled. Disappearing wasn't an act of retreat, it was design, an architectural decision. I mapped it the way I'd mapped my father's blueprints, with load-bearing strategy and hidden exits, with quiet angles where no one would think to look. I sold my car, canceled my subscriptions, deleted my social media accounts, called my landlord, paid 6 months in advance, then disappeared before the lease expired. I changed my email, cut off old friends, turned off the world, and I re-emerged. Not as Evelyn Whitmore, disinherited daughter, but as a ghost wrapped in corporate shielding. My first move was registering a Delaware LLC Etherius Group A name with no legacy, no bloodline, no expectations, just clean font and cold neutrality. Through it, I opened 5 shell companies across multiple states, each one under a different agent, each one linked only by the thinnest legal threads. I spent weeks studying tax code loopholes, quiet title actions, asset protections. If my father left me out of the legacy, I'd build one no one could trace. The first asset I acquired was a decaying boutique hotel on the coast of Savannah, Georgia, built in 1928, abandoned since 2015. Water damage. Pigeons in the attic. No elevator, but the bones were clean. Terracotta tile, wrought iron balconies, a rooftop with a view of the sea. I bought it in cash under one of my shelves for pennies on the dollar. Everyone thought it was a vanity purchase. No one expected it to turn profit. They didn't know me. For 6 months, I lived on site. A sleeping bag on cracked tile. I ate canned soup and microwaved oatmeal. No staff, no praise. Just blueprints, calculations, sweat. I hired contractors who'd been ignored by the bigger firms. I paid them fairly, I asked questions. I stayed up with the electricians and learned the circuits myself. By the 7th month, we reopened the Mariner Clean Lines local artwork rooms named after constellations. By month 10, it had a 92% occupancy rate and coverage in 3 travel blogs. And just like that, Evelyn Whitmore became a silent force in hospitality. While the Whitmore name was plastered on champagne bottles and broken promises, I bought 3 more properties, 2 former textile warehouses in Charlotte, an abandoned rail depot in upstate New York, a small bank in Oregon soon to become a co-working hub. Every acquisition went through a new LLC, every deed clean, no trace of bloodlines. My mother still hosted charity luncheons, Nicholas still gave keynotes about revitalizing family legacy, but I was building something real, something rooted in utility and precision. I didn't need a crest, I needed control. And then came the email sent quietly from a broker I'd met at an urban planning summit years ago. Subject line, off-market opportunity, Whitmore Estate. I blinked. At first I thought it was a prank, but the document was real. Nicholas had tried refinancing the estate twice. Defaulted, he'd borrowed against the house to fund 2 more startups and a lifestyle that bled too fast for any legacy to keep up. The estate, my childhood home, was now being shopped quietly to discreet high-net-worth buyers. The minimum bid was just under $19 million. I could offer $21. I didn't respond immediately. I sat with it, stared at the floor of my hotel lobby, at the tile I had chosen myself, at the pillars I had restored, at the flowers a guest had left me with a thank you note. Your hotel gave me peace I didn't know I needed, and I thought, that's all I ever wanted, to give something structure, to be trusted with foundation. So I opened my vault, transferred funds across 3 of my holding groups, drew from the Mariners' profits, pulled capital from a private lender in Toronto who owed me 2 favors, and I made the offer, full cash. Silent purchase, no press. Just one condition: all current residents must convert to leaseholders. Ownership rights will not transfer or be retained. Property name to be managed by Ethos Group. The offer was accepted in 3 days, no counter, no questions, just desperation. Nicholas needed the money. My mother didn't want scandal. They signed away the last thing they thought no one could take from them, and they didn't even know who I was. I didn't go see the house right away. I waited. Waited until the deed was in my inbox, until the key was delivered in a velvet box, until the contracts were finalized. And then at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, I drove up the long winding road alone. No lights, no press, just the sound of gravel under my tires and the breath of trees that had watched me grow up in silence. The house looked the same, but it wasn't. Now it was mine, not because I inherited it, because I claimed it. It started with a courier. He arrived in a gray suit, handed the envelope like it was a wedding invitation, and left without a word. The return address: Whitmore and Lyons, the family's longtime legal firm, the seal silver sharp embossed. Inside a lawsuit, filed by Nicholas Whitmore and Eleanor Whitmore, claiming fraudulent acquisition of Whitmore estate deception through proxy shell corporations and malicious concealment of familial interest. I read it over dinner. Lobster bisque, fresh bread, a glass of silent victory. They had finally discovered who bought the mansion. It took them almost a year. They'd been living in it the whole time under a lease written in language neither of them truly understood because they never believed they'd need to. The lease was fair, 12 months, reasonable rate. One condition: no public-facing claim of ownership or legacy rights. But Nicholas had always struggled with boundaries. He gave interviews, posted photos, pushed stories to society columns. And when the whispers grew louder that he no longer held the deed that the estate was managed, he panicked. Panic in men like him doesn't come with apology, it comes with lawyers. My legal team was ready. 3 women, 1 ex-DOJ, 1 real estate litigator, and 1 estate strategist with a spine made of law. We'd been preparing for this. Every document, every transaction, every shell signature and timestamp. I didn't need to fight. I only needed to show up. The court date was set for early spring, not a trial, just a hearing. But it felt like the world had shifted on its axis. The same mahogany courtroom where my father once testified before a zoning board now hosted a battle for his legacy. one he never thought I'd be the last player in. I arrived early. Simple black dress, no jewelry, hair slicked back. Not as a daughter, not as a plaintiff, but as a landowner. Nicholas entered, flanked by two attorneys and ego. His tie was crimson. He looked bloated with entitlement. My mother wore navy classic conservative pearls. Of course, always the pearls. She glanced at me once, then away like I was a painting she regretted never purchasing. The judge was a woman, late 60s, sharp eyes, no patience for theatrics. She read the filing aloud, then turned to me. Miss Whitmore, do you wish to respond? I stood. No, Your Honor, my counsel will, and I sat back down. My lead attorney walked forward and placed a single folder on the table. No theatrics, no PowerPoint, just evidence. Inside that folder, the original mineral rights contract missing my signature, legally, voiding its transfer, purchase records of the estate through Ethris Group, clean approved transparent lease agreements signed, notarized, enforceable, and finally, a letter. Not from me, not from my lawyers, but from my father, unearthed from a locked drawer in a secondary office found months after his death. It wasn't part of the official will. It wasn't notarized, but it was real dated, signed, written in his hand. To Evelyn. If you're reading this, then the world unfolded the way I feared. I couldn't change the legacy I built. But I hoped I could leave you tools. They won't understand, but one day, they will answer to your silence. The courtroom stilled. Even the court reporter looked up. The judge nodded once, then twice, and in 5 minutes it was over. The court finds no legal basis for the claims presented. The acquisition was clean, the rights valid, the lease enforceable. All claims are hereby dismissed. Court costs to be paid by the plaintiffs. File closed. Nicholas didn't speak. He stood frozen, mouth slightly open, hands clenched. My mother blinked once, twice, then turned her eyes to the floor like it might offer a different ending. They didn't lose a case. They lost the story. Outside, press waited not for me but for him. Mr. Whitmore comment on the court ruling. Is the estate officially no longer in family control? Do you intend to appeal? He walked past them without answering. For the first time in his life, Nicholas had nothing to say. I didn't give interviews, didn't post anything, didn't celebrate. I returned to my hotel that night, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window of my suite. The skyline blinked back at me, full of towers my father once touched and homes my mother designed but never made warm. And I whispered to no one, "You built the house, but I built the key." Weeks later, I returned to the estate. Alone, no guards, no staff, just me. I walked through the halls, past the portraits, past the piano, past the empty spaces they never thought I'd return to. And I paused by the mantel in the grand room. On it, I placed a single frame, a photo of the house taken the day I bought it. Not a selfie, no people, just windows, stone and sky, under it engraved, secured not by blood but by truth. After the court ruling, I expected rage. I expected Nicholas to shout, to slam doors, to threaten appeals. I expected my mother to call her voice, frosted with false warmth, begging for dignity. Instead, there was silence. And then, compliance. They signed the lease. 12 months. Renewable annually, Nicholas for the West Wing. My mother in the garden suite terms, standard except one clause. Clause 14b. Tenants shall make no verbal, written, or symbolic claim of legacy ownership. Any violation results in immediate termination of residency. I had it printed in bold, underlined, initialed. They both signed. I didn't force them to leave. I gave them a choice. They chose to stay under my name. Life resumed. Publicly, they said nothing. No interviews, no social media, just whispers through lawyers and assistants. Privately, I imagined the silence was louder. Nicholas, once the heir to a legacy empire, now paid rent through a third-party property app. My mother, once the queen of Whitmore Estate, now scheduled garden access through a digital calendar. I wasn't cruel, I was exact. The estate changed. Not on the outside, still marble columns, stained glass, but inside, it evolved. The East Wing, once reserved for gala guests and aging oil magnates, was repurposed. I turned it into a sanctuary, a non-profit community wing for disinherited daughters. Women like me, women cast aside in the name of tradition, succession, and patriarchal continuity. They came quietly, one by one. Architects, lawyers, artists, engineers. They didn't cry, they rebuilt. I hired a chef to run the old banquet kitchen. She was 42, laid off from a fine dining job after a divorce. She now trains underprivileged women to run culinary pop-ups. I reopened the old library, filled it with books about finance, architecture, power. I restored the greenhouse and filled it with heirloom vegetables, not roses. The mansion was no longer a monument to one man's name. It was a blueprint of survival, and I didn't put my name on the gate. I didn't need to. One morning, I received an email from the estate's property manager, subject line, Request for lease renewal, Nicholas Whitmore. He wanted to stay another year. No changes. Same terms attached was a note unsigned. I've made peace with it, just don't change the piano. I didn't reply, but I authorized the renewal. Later that week, I visited no entourage, no announcement. I wore flats, slipped through the side entrance past the kitchen, listened to the sounds of cooking, laughter, life. I moved through the mansion like a curator, not of art, of reclamation. In the hall once lined with portraits of men in oil and ego, I hung a single frame, a blank canvas underneath. For every daughter they forgot to paint. I found my mother in the conservatory. She was watering an orchid, the same orchid I once broke as a child and was forbidden from touching plants for a year. She didn't turn when I entered, didn't flinch. You've changed the curtains, she said. They were yellowing. They were antique. So is most prejudice, I replied. She smiled faintly. You were always too clever for us. I didn't answer. Are you happy now? She asked, voice small. I considered the question. No, I said, but I'm done needing your permission to be. As I turned to leave, she asked one more question. What will happen to this place when you're gone? I paused in the doorway. It'll still stand, but it will never belong to just one name again. The next morning, I received 2 checks. One from Nicholas, one from Eleanor. Both automated, both predictable. Legacy reduced to a calendar reminder, and yet, not once have they missed a payment. At night, sometimes I return alone, walk barefoot through the marble halls, touch the walls I once feared, stand under chandeliers I was never allowed to turn on. And I speak not aloud, but in my mind, to the girl who once stood outside her own family's story. They wrote you out, so you built the damn pen. I didn't take revenge by force. I took structure, I took rights, I took ownership, the kind that doesn't scream, it signs, it seals, it lasts.